we are a small country. There are only 5 million of us in the world, and as with most small countries, the need for a definition of who you are in the world is more pronounced. And then when you have little else culturally to anchor yourself in, when you're speaking English, that's your first language. When you are so exposed to the pop cultures of the world, one of the most natural things that you find yourself attached to would be the national identity that had been imbued in you when you were growing up.
You know, we're so much about search and destroy. You know, like we're constantly trying to reinvent ourselves and, you know, build underground, above ground, build out, and you know, we're kind of still figuring things out. You know, so I'll say the film industry is such as well, still kind of figuring things out.
You could say that in the past 20 years, as the country sought to find an identity, a national identity, and still struggling to find it, you could say that the burgeoning, growing film industry, represented over the past 20 years, is also trying to find that identity. So you had the Jack Neos who are writing about the world that he knows, which appeals to a lot of heartlanders. And you have Eric Koo and you have Royston Tan, you have Kelvin Tong, all writing about their own worlds, and myself included. So we're all talking about the worlds that we know and understand, and they all represent different facets of Singapore's society, Singapore's community. And in that sense, you could say that the cinema of the past 20 years is sort of representative of where we are in Singapore today. We're still looking for the identity. And you could say it is very colourful, it's very mixed, and you can never really pinpoint it because it's very, very layered and multifaceted. Or you could just say that it just doesn't exist. And they're so disparate, you know, that all of us live in our own communities and in our own little worlds, but nothing actually really brings it together. There's nothing bringing it together except maybe you could say food, which is what the Singapore Tourist Board keeps on bringing out year in, year out, right? Whenever they work on campaigns, and I worked with the Singapore Tourist Board before, it's always about food. When in doubt, bring food in.
What does it mean to be Singaporean? Because then that begs another question in my head, at least, that then shouldn't Singaporean films be like that, be rojak? And I think yes, but our rojak is a certain type of rojak.
Do you think that Singapore culturally, to begin with, is already problematic? How can you sell a culture when you don't even know what that culture is?
Maybe. You think so?
I think so, yes. But actually for a filmmaker, it's actually quite hard for us to, like, if we set a goal of trying to make a film for the foreign market or for the foreign audiences, it's actually quite hard because we also don't know what they like. Yeah, it's like those, I feel for those films that successfully made it to the foreign markets or are well received by the foreign audience, it's really so-called by chance. It's a good film that they happen to enjoy, and not that they really set up the intention of making that film for this particular country or any of the foreign audiences. So for us, if you need to tell a story or shoot a film, for the kind of budget we have, usually it has to be a Singaporean story. It has to happen in Singapore. So our characters have to speak in a certain way, which is our culture, so-called. like we have to speak in this way lor, like what I'm speaking now lor.
We have been brought up with a sort of a top-down approach. We are the authority and you do not question. I'm the teacher and you are the student. You learn. Back in school, it's the same thing. And then you go to the army, it's being reinforced. I am of a higher rank. You just do whatever I say. And so people get in tuned into that kind of mindset where, yes, you know, whatever the people of authority says, it must be right. And so we do not question. And with this kind of culture where we do not question, it runs against the veins of developing art. Because when it comes to art, people do question.
There must be some real core in terms of love for what you're talking about and what you're going to tell and what you're going to put, because out on film it's a laborious process. And you know, I know that a lot of people are, you know, upset with I mean, you look at the OB markets and all that. I mean, it's always frustrating, but sometimes it's so frustrating that you try to push it a little bit further.
I would call it a Singaporean cinema when I think it's not purely Indian, like, you know, the language is not all Tamil, that it is not just, and where it's not 70-30, where it's a good mix of languages, races, stories involving different kinds of characters, which is what we see, what we familiar with. But if it is 80% Indian, then it's an Indian film. It's set in Singapore, but a Singaporean Indian film. So I don't know whether we have done that yet, you know, or whether if you do that, whether it sells.
What I observe is that there's no film projects or film work that touches on the Malay community. These are all films made in Singapore by Singaporeans, but they are not speaking about my community. When you know that Singapore is a multiracial, multi-language kind of a community, right? But when these films are sold and marketed overseas, this, you know, it gives sometimes when people who are not familiar with Singapore, when they look at these films, they might see that, oh, Singapore has only this culture, you know. So I think it comes out of my frustration personally, that I felt that, you know, I need to do something. So that was when I realized that, you know, if you don't do it, or rather if I don't do it, no one else would do it, right?
My personal hope or wish for Singapore cinema moving forward, it's not about what is right or what is wrong, you know. It's not about, you know, art house or mainstream, because that we could go on forever about that. But I feel what I'm looking forward to is a cinema of possibilities. Why? Because my sense is we are probably one of the few countries that could do that. We are multilingual, we are multiracial, we are a very, very complex society, migrant society, we are a very colorful society, we speak in a mismatch of languages. I think if any country could create a cinema that's very diverse, that's of different shapes, of different sizes, of different genres, different types, I think we are the one.